And we're live with the Galileo Podcast. My name is Jay, and I'm your host, and I'm here with a few guests today. We've got Jamie, who's a returning speaker, and he's one of our good friends from a couple other simulations, including a couple non-Obsidian Fleet simulations. We're also here with Drew, who plays our Chief Operations Officer, and we're here with a first-time guest, Matt. And Matt's one of our newer players, and he plays our diplomat, Paul Alasia. So, do you guys want to say hi, introduce yourselves?
Hey guys. This is Matt. How you all doing?
All right. Jamie and Drew, you guys have been on before. But like I said, Matt, this is your first time being on a podcast with us, so I thought it would be fun to kind of take a few minutes and for you to introduce yourself to our group and to tell us a little bit about your character.
Cool. So just dive right in?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm Matt. I'm a PhD student at Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. I'm originally from New York. And my character's name is Paul Alasia, and he is a diplomatic officer. He is the only dedicated diplomatic officer on the Galileo, although there's an NPC that's controlled by Shy, I think. So it's not an empty department, but it's a small department, and I think that's sort of normal. I wouldn't imagine that you would need a large diplomatic corps on any ship, let alone a Nova-class ship or a science ship. The idea for creating the character was it's something that's a lot more sort of it brings a lot more contrast on some other sims than it does on the Galileo. But my main idea behind the character was what happens when you have a character that's sort of not. Just think about the normal Starfleet officers. They're always sort of portrayed on the show. They're always real eager beaver go-getters. They're always working, and they throw themselves into their work when they're upset about life, and like their work is really what defines them. And some of them are married, but they have very little contact with their families back home, and they have very little social lives outside of the circle that they create with the other officers. And what if you have an officer that's just not geared that way? What if you have an officer who's not primarily defined by their time or their duties in Starfleet? Not that they don't care about their duties, just that they have other ambitions in mind, and they have political connections outside of the immediate Starfleet structure. And I thought that would, again, on the Galileo, that's not as much of a contrast character as some other characters, because I think that the people that create the characters on this sim are unusually good about being a little bit more balanced. But on your average sim, where everybody is an incredible hand-to-hand fighter, and everybody's got engineering backgrounds, and they're all good pilots, and they're all amazing at everything that you could ever ask them to do, and you have this one guy who's just like, I'm in Starfleet, cool. Like, he's not a graduate of Starfleet Academy, and he's not indoctrinated into the Starfleet way of thinking in the way that a lot of the other officers would be, and that's sort of the main thrust behind him.
Yeah, that's a really good point you brought up. Like we all do see a lot of times on different games and different simulations, we see those characters that are kind of like your prototypical Starfleet officer. They're bound by a code of duty. That's their first and primary function on the ship, and that's the one thing that a lot of their writers focus on. Is kind of that whole in-character duty aspect. But like you were mentioning, it's really nice and really refreshing to be able to see characters like yours, which show kind of like the other side to being a Starfleet officer. Kind of a little bit of what goes on behind the scenes, and those little tidbits and fun stories, which really add depth to a character and help kind of make it human and something that just the average reader can relate to.
Yeah. And I think that, maybe it's just fear after getting back into. I simmed for a while when I was younger, but I haven't simmed in a long, long time. And, maybe it's just fear or insecurity. But I really like the idea of just sort of having, like the character, I'm in the support department, right? And I think that that's really like a good way of describing my vision for the character. Like, he's not going to be useful in a firefight. He's not going to be, the captain and the XO and the Lyra are going to still be the primary go-betweens in any new species that we meet or an existing species. So he's inherently like sort of a support character. He's a B-story guy. He's never going to be the guy in a given story, and I'm completely comfortable with that. So, and that's sort of like where I envision his place on the ship. Maybe it'll evolve over time, but that's my initial vision anyway.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so far you've done a great job. You've definitely realized a good, I'd say a very good percentage of your character already. And, I mean, everything that I read that comes from him just seems very genuine. It flows smoothly. And I think you're doing a fantastic job. So.
Oh, nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I mean, ultimately, the point of all this is for you to have fun playing your character, you know. So that's what makes me the most happy is, you know, to hear that you're enjoying kind of the stories that we create and that you're able to kind of participate and have fun, you know, dealing with our insane characters and subplots and all the other nonsense we come up with.
Right.
So yeah, I guess this is a good time to segue into our first topic. I'm actually going to switch things around a little bit. I want to go straight into talking about some of the departmental duties because, Matt, you actually just mentioned being a part of the support department, which is kind of a unique, it's definitely a unique department on our ship, and we have it structured a lot differently than kind of what you would see on other simulations, especially simulations where the ship is a lot bigger, you know, for example, a Galaxy class or a Sovereign class. And so what we've done on Galileo, as you know, is we've combined intelligence, the chaplain corps, and all of our diplomats and ambassadors all into the same department. And they all, you know, some of the different positions have different functions, but like you mentioned, they're all there to support not only the command staff but some of the other departments. So I guess do you have any certain specific take on it? Do you kind of like the way that that's structured? Like especially as a player, you know, do you kind of prefer the way we do it, or do you prefer the way that some other simulations do it, where they have like a dedicated department just for diplomacy and like a dedicated department just for intelligence?
I guess it would depend on the mission of the ship a little bit. I think for the Galileo it makes perfect sense. And really, I mean, having a support department is taking into account the understanding that there's a lot of hazy overlap between the activity of a diplomat and the activity of an intelligence officer. In real life, the foreign embassies, are usually the seats of where espionage activity take place. So diplomats are kind of the people that smile in the face of foreign officials, while the intelligence officers are the ones that go behind their back and stab them. So,
like the 1-2 combination, you know.
I mean, in reality, if a diplomatic officer, like we're doing a mission with the Cardassians right now, one of my personal posts was just to do like a report on the Cardassians, like on how we should be conducting ourselves in their presence. And if an intelligence officer were to write the same report, it wouldn't be that different. It would have a sort of fundamentally different perspective in that intelligence sort of begets a worldview of like balance of power and realism, and diplomacy kind of begets a more constructivist worldview where you think that contact and hashing out ideas can lead to resolutions. But in the end, both people are through different means trying to manipulate outcomes to their own benefit. So I think that you could have them divided into two separate departments, but I don't think it would make a ton of sense. And having Minta as my superior officer, that really makes a lot more sense than making me the chief of a diplomatic office and making her the chief of an intelligence office, because we'd be working together in the same vein anyway. And maybe having intelligence sort of lord over diplomacy a little bit makes sense, especially in the world of Star Trek that we exist in right now. You know, as many dangers as we have flying at us.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, all of your points are excellent. And it's kind of funny because Lyra herself has a background in intelligence. She was a former chief intelligence officer, and so she kind of took a little bit of a unorthodox path towards getting into the command department based on her background, you know. And so because of her background, I tend to try and structure our missions so that there is always going to be some emphasis on diplomacy slash intelligence. And part of wanting to do that for this mission was bringing in the Cardassians, which is a race and a theme that's very easy to incorporate intelligence and diplomacy into, because they have so much on-screen so many on-screen appearances and so much actual canon reference that we can refer to, and it's just it's kind of one of those fun things I wanted to do. Like, we're all obviously going to be down in the mines and doing a little bit of like horror mystery stuff, but at the same time I thought it would also be a great opportunity for us to kind of do a little bit of diplomacy, where we explore kind of that friction between the two empires, and also to be able to do some intelligence, because we all know that the Cardassians are always up to something shifty behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
So I guess we also have, Drew's away right now, but I guess we can get started on another department. And Jamie, that's the department that you are in. And also, I'm not sure if Jen's here, but she also plays a lot of operations officers. And hey Jen. And yeah, so ops is it's a very strange department. It's, in my opinion, it's the busiest and most important department on the ship. But I also don't think a lot of people often realize how much responsibility ops has and exactly what types of things ops actually does, because I think ops overlaps with some of the duties and the functions of other departments, but their actual roles, for your average operations officer, the actual role and character incorporates a little bit of everything. They're kind of like the jack of all trades. So I guess Jamie and Jen, do you guys want to start off by talking a little bit about ops and kind of what the things are that you enjoy about ops, and kind of what your version and your personal vision of an operations officer is?
Yep, ladies first. Go on,
Who
Ian.
wants to go first?
I'm having a bit of trouble hearing you there.
Computer hates me.
Yes, I think your computer does hate you.
Is that any better?
A little bit.
Great. Perfect.
We're getting some static. How about you back out and then I'll resend you an invite?
Oh, is that any better?
No, it's getting a little choppy.
That's fine. You can just resend the invite. Sorry.
It's okay. Just try backing out, and I'll send you an invite, and you can come back in, and we can try it again.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Oh, technology.
The way that her mic was breaking up had a very specific sort of sci-fi feel to it, so I feel like we could have steered it to the skid a little bit and just enjoyed the weirdness of it.
You trying to decipher like one word in between all the little stutters. Talk a little bit about ops.
Okay, well, I pretty much play almost nothing but ops. Until recently, I've played literally nothing but it. I tend to play it as a jack of all trades position, like you said there, Jay. And I'm always doing a bit of everything. A lot of the time, I'm helping the engineers. I always make sure I get a good in-character and out-of-character relationship with the engineer. I'm generally all over the place doing a little bit of everything. In star bases, I'm doing the more usual thing of sorting out supply and making sure every department has what it needs. In a battle situation, I do hundreds of different things in battle situations. I'm usually handling communications, damage reports sometimes as well, and scanning areas, doing like battle damage assessments, and generally keeping an eye on everything that isn't already being kept an eye on by every other department.
Yeah, that's I mean, those few things that you just mentioned right there encompass a lot of work. You mentioned dealing with logistics, dealing with communications, damage control. There's also power management.
Yep.
Pretty much every auxiliary system on the ship.
Yep.
For example, transporters, environmental controls, life support, docking procedures, even shuttlecraft operations are all kind of some of the things that fall into the umbrella of ops. And then, of course, like you also mentioned, ops shares a lot of common ground with engineering on the technical side. I think engineers deal more with propulsion maintenance, specifically for impulse and warp. But ops, is they're kind of like the technical experts of the ship. Something breaks, and you need it fixed, you call ops. So I mean, just between all that stuff, I mean, I really can't think of another department off the top of my head that's so that has so many different responsibilities, and it's kind of weird. Most ships, you look at their ops department, it is really not a big department. You might have one player character, maybe two, a couple NPCs or something, and then you'll have like a huge security department. But in reality, it kind of needs to be the other way around, because the ship really can't function without the ops people to make it run.
The only problem I tend to have is when we're not in one of those situations, like a battle situation or in a starbase. I tend to struggle because a lot of the stuff that ops do is completely everyday stuff that essentially isn't worth doing a post about, if you get my meaning on that. So I have to do quite a bit of work with other departments and quite a bit of character development to make up posts.
Yeah. Although I do kind of think some of it kind of depends on the game master, right? And kind of how they create situations and how much they get people involved. I think, at least for me, I try to get all departments kind of involved equally. You make sure no one's really left out. It's probably one of the first steps I take during mission creation. But most importantly, I think, I try to put as much emphasis as possible into making it realistic. So what I want for the simulation is to have us be in an environment where what our characters are doing reflects how it probably really would be on board a starship. And that means, that some of those mundane tasks, like, adding an extra bed to someone's quarters, or, like crawling through a Jeffries tube to go fix a conduit or something like that. Even those small mundane tasks that don't necessarily seem like they'd be too exciting, there's still things that kind of we try to portray on Galileo. And then we'll also throw in, some fun little roadblocks here and there, to kind of spice it up so it doesn't get too boring. No, I agree. There's a lot of it is kind of some of that off-screen stuff that, you really don't see too much. It's just kind of assumed that it happened. But there's so much of that stuff that is assumed to have happened that, we have to show some of it in order for it to, be a realistic simulation. Matt, do you have any, what do you think about ops? Have you ever played an ops character before?
No, I never did. In the past, I did tactical, and then I did engineering. So in a lot of ways, I kind of circled around ops a lot without ever actually doing it. And I guess my thought on it is just like, it's so hazily defined by the show, So there is like there's a lot of room to be creative with it, but it's also like basically everything every other department doesn't want to do falls to ops. Like in the history of the show, who has ever been a main cast ops officer? Like
Harry King.
Data, maybe?
Yeah, Data, Harry King.
I guess you could describe it. Yeah, so I mean, and even then, Worf on. I mean, that was Chief. The Chief O'Brien did almost everything an ops officer would have done, with a little bit of stuff. I guess with a little bit of Dax thrown in, like she was a science officer, but she would always run the sensors and scans and things like that, which I feel like should be an ops thing.
Yeah.
But it's really because you would think because think of how much harder it is to be because a tactical officer, if they're not doing scans or running diagnostics of the ship, they have no reason to exist except for during a firefight.
Yeah.
You know, so it's there's this. I feel like there's a lot of like sort of overlap to get to like engineering and tactical and ops are always trying to sort of carve out their own little fiefdoms of like, no, this is what we do. No, this is what we do. And tactical gets the weapons, and engineering gets anything that has to do with the actual movement of the ship, and then ops basically just gets the leftovers. So it's sort of I kind of respect the fact that you only do ops characters because it's sort of like the poor. It's like it's kind of like the forgotten stepchild of all the departments.
That's pretty funny. And actually, our ops players on Galileo are going to be getting really, really busy starting next week when we start up our Tribble subplot, because we are going to have little furry Tribbles running around everywhere on the ship, and it's going to be Ops who's going to be tasked with finding them and kind of stopping the infestation. So they're definitely in for a very busy busy month of writing. And I'm really looking forward to it. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Obviously other departments will all be included as well, but it's going to be primarily the function of the ops department to kind of spearhead the hunt for the Tribbles.
And even now you can hear like all the tactical officers throwing their hands up in the air and screaming, "Why don't we get to do Tribble eradication? Why does ops get that all the time?"
I think I said this on another podcast, but officially for the record, I do not condone the killing of any Tribble on our simulation. There will be repercussions for any character who kills a Tribble.
Well, the last time I was here, I gave my solution to the Tribble problem. Just open all the airlocks.
Your final solution, as it were?
Yeah, the final solution. Oh, boy. So, Jen, you're...
Not again.
We're sorry, guys. We're having technical difficulties. But, I think Drew's a little busy. So let's, we can come back to ops. Let's right now go into a topic which we talked about during our last podcast. And then I kind of want to continue it a little bit. And that's kind of the discussion about 18-plus content, also known as mature content, and specifically what is acceptable versus what is not acceptable. And all of us here play on 18-plus simulations. All of us here are mature writers. We're all good writers. And I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody here has a lot of experience playing on different types of games. So I'd like to just kind of run down the, have each of you spend a few minutes talking about what your experiences have been like playing on 18-plus simulations, why you prefer 18-plus simulations, and what you personally view as that fine line between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So, Matt, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I've been on 18-plus sims before, and the reason I like an 18-plus sim is essentially because I like to curse. In my real life, I use cursing like, I use it like punctuation. I just think that curses are funny. On the other hand, it seems like what usually attracts somebody to an 18-plus sim is the sexual aspect of it. And I have never written a sexual post. I have not personally read much in the way of sexual posts that aren't borderline pornographic. I'm not a prude or anything. It's not that it bothers me or anything. It's just it's outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not good at writing that kind of thing. And often the sex in the post is just not necessary to character development. I remember I was listening last time and you mentioned Lyra is Delton. right?
Lyra is Orion, but she had
Orion. Right. I always get Orion and Delta confused.
who was a Deltan. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Orions are, at least to some extent or another, defined by their sort of different sexual mores from humans. And you could probably say that about Rysons too.
Right.
So it would be disingenuous to not incorporate a sexual aspect to those characters, an overtly and blatantly sexual aspect to those characters, unless like that's their arc, like they're specifically like one of the more closed-in Orions or Rysons. On the other hand, I don't know. You know, the other thing is, it's hard to write a good sexual post. So maybe it's not even just that it's pornographic; it's that it's just bad. Usually, it's crazy. Like just the writing is crappy.
It's like it's like a bad cheesy sex tape, kind of, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, like such and such, their chest heaved and their eyelids fluttered. And let me tell you, I've had plenty of sex in real life, and I'm probably just doing it wrong. But let me tell you, it's nothing like sort of the high-minded rhetoric that you're going to hear in the average Star Trek sim post, because sex is just the most transcendent experience you could ever have, apparently, and it's I allow for the possibility that I'm just bad at it, but I think more likely it is that, sex with a long-term partner is a more mundane part of life, and you don't want to sort of write that into it, so the sex ends up becoming this like very sort of ethereal, high-minded thing, and I don't know, it really irritates me, and I have a difficult time enjoying them.
No, that's, I mean, you brought up a great point, and I think that's kind of the fundamental basis for that fine line, at least in my opinion, is that when you're writing a sexual post, for those people who prefer to do it and who enjoy doing it, as long as it's well written and as long as it actually adds to a character's personal storyline. And when I say that, I mean it's not simply gratuitous. It's not simply there for the sake of writing sex or writing smut. It's there for a specific purpose and actually helps advance the character's storyline. Then I think that's acceptable. But like you were saying, let's say you've got characters that are in a long-term relationship. They're going to be having a lot of sex. That's what a long-term relationship means. So for the, let's say you've got like a couple who's just putting out like 10 sex posts like every 2 months, and eventually you're gonna kind of be like, okay, well, I've seen this before. Like, I get it. Yeah, they have sex. Like, you guys don't need to write it out every time you want to have it happen. So at that point, it gets to be a little gratuitous and a little unnecessary.
Every experience of sex between any two characters is exponentially less interesting than the last time those two characters had sex, and I think that is a memo that a lot of writers haven't gotten yet. So I don't. It doesn't sound like it's a big problem on the Galileo, but it was a big problem on another set I was on years ago.
Yeah. Honestly, things on the Galileo are pretty good. Most of our writers, actually, I think all of our writers are. Have a high maturity level, and I mean, I really wouldn't have brought them aboard to join the community if I didn't think they were mature enough to handle kind of, the things that accompany the 18+ rating. But I think we've got a very diverse crew, both in character and out of character. So we have a lot of different characters, all interacting from different species, different races, different genders, and we've also got a very diverse group of writers out of character. People who come from all walks of life, and so I think when you kind of combine that and mix it all together, I mean, we've definitely had some really, really good like romantic posts and sex posts take place, and now that Drew's back. Drew's NPC character actually lost her virginity on Galileo. So I think it's a good time to bring Drew into the conversation. Drew, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of like our 18+ policy and kind of some of the things that you enjoy about it, and kind of what you think that fine line is between what's acceptable and not acceptable?
Yeah. I suppose I'd have to say, for me, where I draw the line, I was just listening in for a few minutes there while you guys were just talking a little bit about it. definitely agree with the points about, advances the storyline, has to make sense. No point in having, a sex post every second post, especially if characters in a long-term relationship. I think for me, probably the biggest point where I draw the line between what I would consider acceptable and unacceptable content, and Jamie knows this because we've had this discussion on the USS Wolf, which is 18 plus sim that I CO, and I've always kind of been of the feeling that in terms of the material is that the writing should reflect a respect for what is occurring. I mean, I guess the way I'd say it is, sex in and of itself is a really, I tend to look at it as a really beautiful thing. So reflecting that and treating it as a union between two people that goes beyond, beyond words, beyond, well, it's the deepest kind of union that two people can share. And having the writing reflect that, I think, has really been a big thing of mine, is that I don't, the kind of posting that I really don't like to see is the stuff where, well, yeah, the kind of stuff that's borderline smut or porn, right? It's you treat the act with respect, and you get good writing. You don't treat it with respect, and oftentimes you get into stuff that just, I don't know, just icks me out.
No, I understand completely. And I think that's a really, really excellent point that you mentioned when we were talking about having respect, not only for the characters, but also for sex itself and what it is. Those people who kind of recognize what sex is, and the kind of the seriousness that comes along with it. I mean, not necessarily from an in-character perspective. You might have some characters like, let's say, we had another Orion on the sim, and there might naturally be promiscuous, but it was sort of like that out-of-character respect for writing a sexual situation. I think that's one of those things that's really kind of important, because if someone has that basic respect, then it's reflected in their writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I mean, you've done some fantastic 18 plus posts on Galileo that they've honestly been a joy to read, and they've been really cool. They haven't just been kind of like mundane, regular old sex posts. They've been they've had their own little twist to it, and they've added a lot of fun character development to all of your characters. And I think that's the key. The key is like, at least for me, when I'm the reader, like, if I enjoy reading someone else's sex post, then that means that they've done a great job. Because this is, like Matt mentioned earlier, writing sex is not something a lot of people do, and it's not something a lot of people have experience doing, and a lot of people honestly don't do it well. I mean, it's understandable, because like a lot of people just don't do it enough to be able to kind of get really good at it. So the fact that I can read someone else's 18 plus post and enjoy it means that the writer has done everything right, and I think that's amazing. And I honestly can't think of like a sexual post that we've had on Galileo where I haven't enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I know for myself, actually, my first, this is going back several years, first 18 plus post that I wrote on, actually the first 18 plus sim in Obsidian Fleet that I was on, I actually, my CO commented that while she liked the material, she felt it was probably a little bit strong for the sim. So I actually, very first one, I got chewed out, and which kind of pushed me away from it for a number of years, because it's like, well, it really comes down to being what is good and what isn't is very subjective in some ways. But one of my current COs, actually CO of the Asgard, I did a little bit of work with him in that regards on the London NPC that's related to my CO character on the Wolf, and his words to me when we started was, he said, focus on the characters, don't focus on the act itself. He said, so basically when you're writing, he says, don't focus on the mechanics of what's going on, because I mean everybody kind of knows how the mechanics work. He said focus on what the characters are feeling, what they're thinking. So, you know, instead of in a post talking about basically, you know, the guy jumping on his girl and, you know, basically sticking his pole into, you know, that kind of stuff. It's just, well, I mean, how do you describe
the sloppy language?
Yeah, how do you just? I mean, it's hard to describe inappropriate 18+ material in a podcast without using inappropriate 18+ material. But he said, you know, instead of focusing on that, he said focus on what the character's feeling, the emotion, the feelings of closeness to their partner, the sensations of, you know, pleasure, that kind of thing. Is don't focus on the mechanics. And I think that that really stuck with me. And also talking with the COs, you know, getting a feel for the CO and what they are comfortable with. Simply because there are degrees of 18+. Like, for example, my CO on the Asgard, there's material that he's not comfortable with that are totally fine on the Galileo, and my own sim is somewhere in between that. So it's like every CO I've come across has a slightly different definition of what's acceptable. So so I found it's just focusing on the emotions and the feelings running through their head tends to work out a better post than the mechanics. And that said, I mean, sometimes you can't get away from the mechanics, but again, going back to the whole respect for the act, is your choice in language really can mean the difference between what is a good post and what isn't. I mean, I'm not going to get into some of the specific language, but all one has to do is just read a bunch of written porn to understand that's not the kind of stuff you really want to see. Whereas I think a little bit of a level of indirection, if you want to call it that, in the language, sort of a little more direct, but a bit of innuendo in some ways, tends to dampen it down a little bit, but still get the point across about what exactly is happening between the couple.
I think more so than with other posts, sex posts require the writer to ask themselves, what is the point of this? You know, we're required to post a certain amount, and so sometimes we write just for the sake of writing, you know, if we're going to be honest about it. With a sex post, you shouldn't just write a sex post for the sake of writing it. And to give an example of what I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie or read the comic, A History of Violence. But there's a sex scene between a married couple who are the main character and his wife in the beginning of the story. And it's this very, like, sort of sweet, like, gentle, like, she's dressed up as a cheerleader, and it's sort of like, it's sweet. It's like you see these two characters, and the main point of this is to demonstrate that these two people are, even after a long period of marriage, still in love. And later in the movie, they have sex again, but it's after all this information about his past comes out, and their relationship has fundamentally changed. And they have sex, but they have this sort of, like, angry, aggressive sex. And the contrast is meant to illustrate sort of the change, the fundamental change that has happened to their relationship. So the two sex scenes weren't gratuitous. They had a point. But for the most part, in most movies, when there's sex in it, it's there because it's titillating, because it will sell tickets, or because it's enjoyable, not because it moves the story forward in any kind of real way.
A game like Game of Thrones. I had to throw that in there because a friend of mine. You can
at least take an argument with Game of Thrones that, like, it's meant to convey, like, a general sense of lawlessness and, like, promiscuity or whatever. But yeah, basically Game of Thrones is pretty much.
I,
300 movie.
I suppose with that one you could, but I think somebody actually did a chart of the last season, and I won't go too far into that, but pretty disturbing stuff in that show. So it's a little bit I'm on the fence on that show in general, but somebody noted that there's 10, 12 episodes or something like that. There's like a dozen episodes per season. Somebody did a count, and there was something like they figured that there was an average of like 2 sex scenes per episode, which to me seemed a little bit gratuitous. I mean, I haven't watched the shows, so they very well probably do advance the plot line, but yeah, it seems a little much.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think any of us write with our characters in mind, saying like, okay, like every season, I have to write like 5 sex posts. So, for season 1, like, I didn't get in my 5 sex posts. Or like, for season 2, I'm behind on my sex posts. Sorry, Jamie. Yeah, go ahead, man. Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, don't know where to start. On the Wolf originally started off as a 13 plus. We decided eventually to change it to 18 plus, and between that we did a mission in the Mirror Universe, and as we know, the Mirror Universe is full of sex-based stuff, lesbianism, etc., etc. I'd have loved to have done that Mirror Universe mission with the 18 plus restriction as opposed to a 13 plus. I actually had my character kidnapped off of the ship, and while she was being held as a prisoner, a few of the guards actually came and raped her, and because of the 13 plus, I could only hint at that's what had happened. I had to really think on how to get the point across without making it obvious that that's what's happening. I actually did get around to making a complete proper 18 plus post for it, but then I went, yeah, this is a little too mature for it. So I never bothered posting it, doing it as a back post or anything like that. And now we're 18 plus. No one has of yet done a mature based post on the Wolf yet. None of us have taken that hurdle to do the first one.
Yeah, I think that one. Some of our players, and digressing to Wolf discussion, I think some of the players are perhaps not the most comfortable with that type of material, but
yeah.
With what Jamie was saying, this 13 plus, that I have to say, for starting out on background material that was 18 plus and bringing that down to a 13 plus level, I have to say that the way that was polished, to the extent that you could take something that was, to be honest, beyond even our 18 plus, what we would consider inappropriate, and actually clean that up to the point that we could post at it at a 13 plus rating, I have to say was definitely something that I was quite impressed with.
Yeah, I definitely bent the line a couple of times, but never broke it completely. Well, yeah, so long as mature posts are done in the right sort of way, I'm happy to do them. I'm happy to read them. Just it happens in an 18 plus sim. You have that freedom to do more different things. You can curse. You can just be more aggressive. You don't have to limit your choice of words and actions to the level of there's little kids in the room.
Yeah, And that's an interesting one, because I think a lot of, and the whole 18 plus thing is, I think a lot of people forget that the Sims are 18 plus not just because we allow romantic posts, sex posts, that kind of thing, but also because there is that other aspect that the world, I mean, even in the 24th century faux utopia that is Star Trek, there is still that aspect of, there is in real life language that you would never see on a PG-13 TV show or even a PG-13 sim. There is material you can write within the constraints of 18 plus that, again, you can't do in a 13 plus environment. I know one of the things, I don't do a lot of it because I'm not the most comfortable with it, is the stuff like the violence specifically. There are things we can do and say that describe the violence in greater detail, and I think there are some kinds of violence that we can put into an 18 plus sim that you wouldn't be able to otherwise do in PG-13. For example, with the whole thing with the wolf, is that there were some aspects of violence there that would have been nice to have rewritten in 18 plus. I know part of your scene there, Jamie, would have been interesting in 18 plus, but that you get that's another aspect that I think sometimes people seem to forget, is that, hey, we can be a little more explicit in our writing about when two people are fighting each other. We can be a little more explicit. We can, talk about the injuries in a little more detail. We can go into that kind of stuff. So I'd say, I'd ask what you guys think about that.
Yeah, you have a lot more freedom of description when you're doing an 18 plus. Like you can literally describe blood pouring out of people's wounds when they've been struck with a bat'leth, stuff like that. You can't do that as well in a 13 plus.
Yeah. I think the whole violence aspect is something we haven't explored too much on Galileo. Just kind of because of the nature of our missions, we're not involved in direct combat as much as some other simulations are. But nevertheless, we still do have either ground combat or ship combat in every single mission. And so we can do things like you mentioned, Jamie, like that. We can talk about and describe dismemberment. We can, set someone on fire and describe how they burn. We can do some of those really graphic things. And to be honest, there's, especially in a mission like what we're doing with ours, where we have a heavy horror element, a heavy horror mystery element, it's going to be kind of necessary in order to bring out that theme to the mission, and kind of set the scene and set the tone for other writers to kind of give it that creepy feel, give it kind of like that eerie, like in those oh my god moments, So yeah, I mean, it's great, and like Drew said, you can do a lot of stuff with violence at a lower rating. You don't necessarily have to have that 18 plus rating to imply that certain things happen or to have like a good action post. But having that 18 plus rating allows you to kind of take it to the next level, And a good writer, and I think we're all great writers, especially everybody on the sim, I think, great writers are able to use that freedom and craft really, really good stories and kind of take the immersion to the next level.
Yeah, I think for those listening, sort of the comparison I draw between what you can do relating to violence with 18 plus versus, say, typical 13 plus is take some of the really good war flicks, at least the ones I'm familiar with, Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, even Black Hawk Down, which first time I saw it was a little over the top, I thought, but I've since grown to appreciate it for its unique qualities. But if you were to take something like that, like let's pick on Saving Private Ryan, that that first scene on Omaha Beach. Imagine them trying to do Saving Private Ryan with a PG-13 rating. I mean, you'd still have the beach, but you can't do that scene. Well, you can, but you don't have that scene at the front of the movie. Does not have the same impact if it was done to, say, a PG-13 or Canada's 14A rating versus the 18A rating that it had in Canada. So that's one of the probably the easiest for people familiar with movies is the easiest difference. And really, if you look at the difference between 13 plus and 18 plus, it comes down to a matter of how descriptive can we be. You know, those 18 plus movies, they tend to go through a lot of fake blood because, well, they can. And even it's not so much they can, it's because it gives you those movies that I refer to, they really put you there, almost as if you were that nameless, faceless private who was in that place, and you witnessed the violence, and in the case of like Omaha Beach, just the sheer horror of what happened on that beach that morning.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, when it came out, what was it, 1998? I'm thinking. Saving Private Ryan. Yeah, it was the first of its kind to show that type of graphic war violence. I mean, obviously you had like Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now, you know, that were kind of precursors to it, but even then you didn't have that detailed and realistic view of combat like Saving Private Ryan did, and that kind of revolutionized the genre, you know. And then Black Hawk Down came out a couple of years later, and kind of it did something pretty comparable. And I mean, both films were pretty shocking at the time. I mean, I remember sitting in the theater watching Saving Private Ryan, and I've got this whole bucket of popcorn in front of me, and like 30 minutes into the film, I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even blinked. I was just like staring at the screen. It was like, oh my god, like, am I really watching this? You know?
Yeah.
But it's one of the greatest war movies, you know, of our time, probably of all time. You know, and same thing with Band of Brothers. You know, it was another great series. So it's one of those things where, if done properly and executed well by proper writers, having that 18 plus freedom is hugely beneficial to a sim. And I want to stress this very much. I think, especially in Obsidian Fleet and kind of the simming genre where you have a mix of casual versus hardcore simmers, not everybody out there is capable of writing proper 18 plus content, and that's not a knock against anyone. You know, that's not to say that some writers are better than others, but we're dealing with such a wide age range of people, people from all walks of life, who have all types of different experiences and different writing backgrounds, and there's just some people out there who, you know, that's not their forte. You know, that's not their strength. You know. And there's nothing wrong with it, but what that means is that when you're a CO, and Drew, you can attest to this, because I've seen some interesting applications that you've gotten before on the Wolf. You know, there's always going to be a few characters who apply, you know, to an 18 plus sim, and you know, we have to be really vigilant to kind of screen them and to kind of look at their past work and to talk to them, to kind of gauge, you know, what they're like as a person and what their writing's like, and to see if they're not only mature enough to handle writing 18 plus content, but also mature enough to be able to receive it, you know, and to see posts that are written with that type of content.
I remember which application you mean there.
Yeah. Look, all I'm gonna say about that application is,
that was so that was, oh man, I'll never forget that.
that one was yeah, that one was it wasn't the application so much that was the issue, is that one of the things I do, and I've had some discussions with Jag about this, and it's kind of a divided opinion in the office, at least when I wasn't still running the office, as to the idea of using doing background checks on people. But I mean, anytime I've always been of the feeling that in this area is that if people post the stuff on the internet, you got to expect that somebody's going to find it. And if I'm bringing in somebody onto an 18+ sim, I want to know a little bit more about them than just what I'm seeing on the post. I want to understand who they are, what they do, what they do. In this case, and I'm not going to go into particulars, but this one person had some background information that I double and triple checked before I brought my concerns to them. They were involved in some, it's called highly inappropriate material.
Yeah, unorthodox. I would call it an unorthodox.
Unorthodox, highly inappropriate. And I think kind of what sealed it is that when I brought this to their attention, said, hey, there's a little bit of concern here. They didn't go, I was doing that a little bit. I kind of got away from it. It was a little bit of a strange phase in my life, and they actually actively attacked me.
Yeah. They went after you, and they justified. From what I remember, they justified everything that they had written in their own mind, and kind of got on your case for even asking the question, as if like somehow that should have been like socially acceptable, and you shouldn't have even asked about it.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I will say that they did apply for another sim that I'm on. I'm not going to disclose which ones, and the CO did accept them. It did end up. They never did write anything inappropriate, so I do have to. My concerns were unfounded, but you never know until you actually see the person writing. And when the material is highly inappropriate, and some will, weird shit. That's the best way to put it.
And actually, when you think about it, Drew, it's one of those cases where it's always better to be safe than sorry. And if I had been in your place, I would have done the exact same thing. And I think there were a lot of COs who would have done the exact same thing. And to be honest, probably by bringing that to that email exchange that you had with the player, by bringing that up, you probably did a very good job of
probably affected their behavior.
Yeah, you brought it to the front of the player's mind, that the type of content that they were posting in other organizations or other groups or whatever was something that raised some eyebrows, and you probably kind of helped them kind of tone things down a little bit, maybe help them see that, hey, maybe some of the stuff I'm doing is a little bit weird, maybe I need to kind of bring it back a little bit. And so I mean, you probably did a public service, to be honest, Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with that, and it's always better to be safe than sorry. And we do the same thing on Galileo. We do background checks. We'll look up someone's email address. I mean, we won't go combing through like their phone records and and their IP logs or anything. But we'll check out an email address. Kind of see what sims the person has been a part of before, if any. And it's just we do it for player safety, and that's the only reason. We want to make sure that we kind of know our players who are coming in, and make sure that no one has anything that's too alarming in their background. I mean, let's be honest, I'm no angel. I've done some some pretty fun and outrageous things on the internet. I mean, I think we all have, but all we ask is that people just be mature and they be honest, and then just be, I guess, Drew, like when you said that you were getting kind of attacked, I think the player kind of got really defensive, and that's like a character trait that is, at least for me, that's something that I don't want. I don't want a player who's going to get defensive when I bring up an issue with them. I want someone who I could talk to and have an open exchange of dialogue with. So again, that goes to kind of the maturity and stuff.
Yeah, and I will say that the player on the other sim, because of my bad interaction with them as a potential CEO, and I was on the same sim as them in another place, I'm not going to get into particulars, but the player did in this case they didn't post any mature material on the other sim. And ultimately, they did leaving the sim because they couldn't. I don't know if they couldn't keep up or they just the character they ended up putting on the sim just wasn't a good fit for the sim, so they went on to do other things. But this is the whole point that I brought up is that is these kind of things, these background checks, like you say, just Google their email address. Most of the time when I Google somebody's email address, not a lot comes up. So I'm flying blind. So
well, except for Matt here. I mean, I Googled Matt's email address, and I just got all types of like porn websites and mailing lists. And
Yeah, it's weird. I'm never not. I'm looking at porn right now. It's weird that you bring that up.
Oh man, yeah. All right, guys. Well, that's I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for another like couple hours, but we're actually at we're a little over an hour now on our podcast, and we actually missed out on one of the topics that we wanted to do. So I want to bring this podcast to an end. If you guys want to stick around for a little bit, we can maybe start up another one. It's up to you guys. But for now, I think we've covered a lot of fun stuff. And Drew, apologies that you didn't get to talk about some of the ops stuff. But like I said, we can segue into another one in a few minutes if you want. But for this edition of our podcast, I'd like to sign off for now. I'm Jay, and I'm here with my guests, Drew and Matt and Jamie. And it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. And we will see you next time. Say bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Later, everyone.